The developers of everything and the very fine people at Double Fine were kind enough to provide me with a PC copy of the game to review. I should note that the version I have is a little pre-release and probably missing one or two things, but I haven't noticed any issues at all yet, and I feel pretty confident about being able to rate the experience. And experience is definitely the word. Now this game has been out for a month now on PlayStation, so most of you have probably already seen one or two reviews, and maybe even a Let's Play of it, even though it's only coming out on PC today, and you might already know how it works. Essentially, you can be just about anything in the game world, jumping from creature to item to planet to creature as you please, and exploring many levels of perspective. There is occasional narration in the form of recordings from lectures given by Alan Watts, who was a British philosopher with a very interesting outlook on the world. He was influenced by Buddhism, Zen, and Taoism, among other philosophies, and he spoke a lot about the ways in which all things are connected, and how we are not only part of the universe, we are the universe. Everything, the game that is, doesn't really delve too deeply into these ideas mechanically. In fact, pretty much all you do is jump from thing to thing. Now I'm a tree. Now I'm a particle of dust. Now I'm the sun. Now I'm a cabbage. But there are no interactions between these objects. Nothing does anything other than wander around and occasionally make a noise or do a little dance. If you want an in-depth philosophy lesson, the mechanics aren't going to really give you that. But that doesn't mean that you don't learn something about the philosophy and experience something new and unique by playing the game. The combination of the simple mechanics and the excerpts from Watt's lectures sprinkled throughout the game is surprisingly effective. Sitting alone and quietly playing everything, you might expect it to get old very quickly. I certainly thought that it would. After all, there's really not much to it. Be a thing, then be something else. That's it, right? And yet, as I listened to Alan Watts describe the importance of perspective, how there's a hierarchy of things above and below you no matter who or what you are, that in his words, you're always in the middle, while I jumped from being to being, evoked a thoughtfulness that I'm sure I wouldn't experience if I were simply listening to a recording of one of his lectures on its own. And perspective is one thing I feel the game does very well. There are little touches that really drive home the sense of scale. At one point, I found myself exploring a grassy area as a deer. I then decided to go down into the grass, into a smaller scale, and as I skittered around as a ladybug, I could see the shape of the horse, my former self, looming over me, gigantic and terrifying. Going down even further, I inhabited a tiny bit of pollen floating through the air against a red background, until I realized that red background was my former body, a tiny piece of the ladybug's shell. Later, I rolled across the desert as a tiny shell, trying to reach a gargantuan building in the distance, but never seeming to be much closer. Finally, I gave in and jumped into a larger form, a snake, and discovered the enormous building was really only a small house, and I reached it within seconds, leaving that tiny piece of shell far behind me. Jumping into the house, I quickly lost track of that little snake. One thing the game doesn't do as well as I'd hoped is make you really feel like you are the creatures and objects you're controlling. The choice of third-person perspective rather than first is understandable. You can be so many different things in this game in such rapid succession, all of which have different perspectives and even different types of movement, that without being able to see what you are, you might quickly forget and lose track. But it also puts a degree of separation between you and your current avatar. Most of the time, I realized I didn't really feel like I was an orca swimming through the ocean, I was merely controlling an orca, and that's a pretty big distinction. Speaking in terms of the philosophy they're trying to illustrate, I think a first-person perspective would have been much more effective. Maybe they could have had the controls in first person with a small third-person display in the corner, showing what you are and how you look to others. But they designed it the way they designed it, and it's certainly not a massive problem, just something I feel could potentially have been done more effectively. All in all, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with everything so far, and despite the seeming simplicity of its mechanics, I find myself going back to it again and again. I even leave it running sometimes while I'm working on other things. If you stop controlling the game, it will start to control itself, exploring and evolving gradually even without your direction, and illustrating Watts' point that the universe carries on even after we're gone. It's incredibly relaxing and makes a very nice backdrop to other activities. And the game even accommodates less contemplative moods. As you play through the so-called tutorial, a process which took me about 2 hours, you slowly unlock more and more abilities and controls, including the ability to spawn in anything you've been in the past, at any time, and even to change its size. It's fun to create a school of giant fish swimming through space, or to shrink down to dust level and make a Whoville-sized planet, which you can then go down and visit. There are also a lot of possibilities here to enjoy this game with children, who might be too young to appreciate the philosophical message, but can still appreciate the joy of goofing around with a sandbox the size of, well, everything. And there is a lot of joy to be found here. Even if you strip away the philosophy and themes and just play it as a be-whatever-you-want simulator, everything is just plain fun to play. I thought about doing a Let's Play of this game, but after giving it some thought, I realized that wouldn't be a very useful thing to do. Unlike most games, everything is something you really need to experience yourself. I've watched others playing it, and it simply does not convey the same feeling as when you're the one in control. It's not enough to see the camera shifting from place to place, to watch some random animal or plant or object make a noise and then do a dance and then jump to something else. It has to be you doing that. I think a lot of what makes many people hesitant about trying the game is that it doesn't look quite as fun as it feels. But I assure you, it really is fun. The only way to really appreciate and enjoy it is to try it yourself, and I highly recommend that you do. Thanks for watching. See you next time.